Good afternoon. We are still in recess until we reach a quorum. Thank you. Committee of the Whole is called back to order. We will now proceed on with SB 55 SFP L1 to 27, page 60, and then L1 to 2, page 61. I guess these are continuing pages. That's Senator Paris. Senator Paris, you have an amendment, ma'am? You do have the floor. You have 5 minutes.
This is Masi. Mr. Chair, yes, the amendment I have basically would appropriate additional $3.2 million to revenue and taxation. And this is because what the changes that were made earlier on. So what this amendment does, it restores a portion of the 10% administrative cost of ACTC and CTC owed to Department of Revenue and Taxation in paying out tax refunds to our people. Because of previous amendments, that 10% was deleted with no funds to make up for it. As in previous budgets, 10% has historically been set aside for this purpose. Previously, on average, DRT was processing approximately $23 million of ACTC, which means they should have received $2.3 million for administrative cost. This year, the CTC and ATC amounts to about $55 million, with another additional $55 million of EITC expected. In a previous amendment, it was stated that all CTC and ATC funds would be placed in a trust fund with no additional money for administration. If this body does not restore the funds to pay for administration, that would mean additional work with less money, which would put greater pressure on the current staff at Department of Revenue and Taxation to comply with the 6-month refund deadline. The employees of DRT are stretched thin, working 6 days a week trying to keep pace with the processing of tax refunds and fulfilling the current mandates, in addition to implementing emerging intensive programs which the public at large depends upon. The Department of Revenue and Taxation has collected about 88% of the budget, which this body is now appropriating. DRT has processed over 60,000 to 80,000 income tax filings annually, totaling $124 to $145 million. The hard work and efforts of our employees at Department of Revenue and Taxation have gone unnoticed and not properly funded throughout the years. But during this last year, in the state of the global pandemic, DRT rose to the call of the governor and the people and provided quite a few services beyond their normal scope. But with constant overtime, they will burn out. And I'm sure the lengthy times at work adds to their stresses, and it's time to help them. And I have some words from staff. They're employing officials to stop ignoring or taking for granted Department of Revenue and Taxation and not to raid the budget. For years, the department, we have put up with months without janitorial services. Even during the pandemic, we were unable to secure a contract for 4 months into fiscal year 2021. Furthermore, they cannot rely on the steady supply of PPEs. They use their own funds to buy water and disinfectants. With the rent the government is paying for the main facility, mold and flooding persists in the restroom, closets, and offices. Every peak or two, they have to secure computers due to possible leaks and the roof being compromised. They have persistent rat infestation. They are forced to wash dishes 10 feet from the toilet, since the facilities do not have kitchens or kitchenettes. OTEC staff have disclosed computers are purchased for the department, but they are then taken away to DOA. Some branches are still utilizing Windows Vista, and although they received a few desktops, it's not enough. And does not include up systems to protect the data, especially during power fluctuations. The dedicated staff are overworked and underpaid. I don't know if officials understand that there are staff that have been working through the pandemic 6 days a week to process returns, amended returns, unemployment compensation exclusion, as well as to complete processing of additional tasks such as 3 EIPs, Azura Imangafa, Plus Up, and now the All Rise, which is about 37,000, would add another 37,500 to their workload. It is hard to keep recruits, given that other agencies have higher pay. So the working conditions at Department of Revenue and Taxation are substandard, and they are still putting out the work that they normally are required, in addition to having to deal with all these other mandates that are put upon them. I think it's important for this body to think about what we're doing. This will be the first time in legislative history that we're removing that 10% administrative cost from DRT.
Thank you, Senator Barris. Just want to make sure that we have an understanding, my colleagues, that the 10% that was removed was a requirement when it was acknowledged by the administration and the Department of Revenue and Taxation. That left me no choice, a former revenue and tax employee, to have that removed from the budget. That was not an option. It was an obligation on our behalf to remove it when it'll give a false impression it exists. Does anyone else like to speak to the amendment? I'm looking at, Speaker, did you want to speak on this amendment? No. No, okay, I just want to make sure. Anyone have? Raise your hand, please, so I'll know you want to speak. There being none, are there any objection to this amendment? You have a question? Okay, you're going to speak to the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for the sponsor. Is there an item listing of how much is going into contracts, what contracts they are, what is specifically needed? I know you explained the situation in DRT, but is there anything to fix the kitchenette, fix the roof leaks, anything like that?
Senator Barrett,
I would have
you to the
to-
question? Okay, go ahead.
I would have to, I don't have a specific detailed listing at this time, but we can get it.
All right, Senator Nelson, does that suffice?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. It's just that there's no idea where this money is going to. And that's all.
All right, thank you. Are there anyone else who'd like to speak to this amendment? Madam Speaker, you would like to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess if I'm following the sponsor, what she's trying to do is make sure that DRT has this year what they had last year in terms of taking care of things that they used to take care of with the 10% from CTC, which they are no longer going to be getting. And with that 10% CTC, they used to take care of either one, Mr. Chair, the ACTC or the CTC, you know what I'm talking about, the child tax credit set aside that we gave 10% to DRT. So when that was removed from the budget, it removed also, you know, the amounts that they had been previously getting every year, I think, to cover things. If I can't find that amendment in front of me, that previous amendment to show what they struck out. But I think it was for covering personnel, overtime, equipment, automation. And automation is one of those things that I think DRT, when they were before us, very much justified as to a need, a continuing need, and almost the more that they can get, the more that they can automate. And that they are actually one of the few agencies in the government that has successfully automated to our advantage, to our revenue advantage. The more they are able to automate the submission of 1040s, they said they want to expand on what they have currently, the faster they will be able to process refunds. The more they are able to automate they gave us a list of what they want to automate going forward. And that the more that they do that, the more it's either going to bring in revenue, it's going to bring in savings for the taxpayers and the government, and of course, efficiencies. And they talked about they're automating right now the driver's license. And so I think they have been successful. They have shown that they are able to use the money that they are getting for the benefit of the people of Guam. And I don't want to make them have to operate with less this year. That would just be going backwards in my mind. When we have the agency who we are able to look to when we get federal money, or when we do a RISE program, we look to them and we add it on top of their current tasks, and we ask them to do this, and they are producing. They're able to do it without complaint. And so I just say, when you have an agency that's operating efficiently like that and able to get this stuff done, and we know for a fact with $600 million in ARP funds that we're going to be calling on DRT for a lot more work, that we should give them the resources that they've asked for and that they need. And so I'm sure that they were counting on the $6 million that was, I can't tell the balance here, but they were counting on the money that they had previously received under that 10% for sure, and hoping for more, because they made that very clear to us when they were here. And it's unfortunate that they're not here in front of us right now. But I would give them every single dime that they request, because they're the ones that are actually producing for us. They were able to get the EIP programs that we started in here, the Mangafa program. They were able to do the RISE. They're going to do the RISE program starting Monday. And I'm just saying, let's not tie their hands. Let's empower them more, because they are actually getting it done. They are actually converting us to technology. They told us some of that conversion is through contracts. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I absolutely support this amendment. I think it's
Right.
only just that we give them this money that they could use well for the benefit of the people of Guam. They could use to further process tax refunds faster, and so that they can continue to produce, and let's not tie their hands. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Madam Speaker. Anyone else like to speak to the amendment? Senator Moylan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, I understand the hard work that DRT is putting in and needing the additional funds, but I again go back to our executive branch, where with over $600 million in American Rescue Plan, that I'm sure a lot of these necessities and needs would fall under the requirements necessary due to the pandemic that could support DRT. If we had the governor's explanation on how she plans to help DRT with the American Rescue Plans, I'm sure we could amend of this amendment, but it's the unfortunate that this body, a co-equal branch of government, is not able to hear that message from our executive branch. And I'm sure, as the director of DRT has been fighting for her employees and what's needed there to address, especially the paying out of the All Rise Act, that message has gone down to the governor, or up to the governor, expressing the need for additional support in the forms of financial assistance. And that's what the American Rescue Plan is all about. I'm sure the governor, if it's in her intentions, would have addressed that with DRT director, ensuring that our public is given the best resources for DRT in order to perform their duties and giving the money to the people. So I just wish, Mr. Chair, that the governor could kindly explain her position with the ARP funds for DRT, and I think that would have been helpful for us here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Senator Moylan. Anyone else like to speak on this amendment? There be Senator Blas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I've been sitting here for the last few days and just listening to the arguments, listening to the conversations as to how we're going to be able to divvy up some funds. And I guess it just got to a point where, we have an economy that's flailing. And we have an economy that's probably going to flow even more. God knows what happens is going to happen in the next couple hours. And, you know, while we sit here and we want to be able to fund these agencies to be able to do these things, I have to sit back and think about the businesses who want to be able to have that kind of problem. Their problem is just keeping the doors open. And a lot of times you'll find businesses who, so they can keep their doors open, they share in the costs. They divvy up what they can so that they can survive. My frustration is sitting here and knowing this because that was me a year ago. That continues to be me today in my private business. So, I guess what I'm getting at here is can we bear in mind as to what's happening outside of this hole, outside of this government, and know what's going on in the economy? I hate to say this, but I would have had the luxury of being able to source out for somebody to clean my trash cans. I'm just going to remain calm. I don't want to blow. I'm just asking that we take those into consideration as we move forward in this. If we got what we got, let's do the best that we can. I know that I may be speaking out of turn here, out of non-germane, but I know there's a conversation that exists to be able to really get to the end game as to what we want to do with this money. Can that happen before we move forward? I think my colleagues in this hall know what I'm talking about. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Does anyone else like to speak to this amendment? There being none, would you like to close? Would you like to close, Senator Paris? You want to speak, Senator Tello? Okay. You have the floor, Senator Tello. You got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Apologize for being late, but I've been able to listen to the conversation on the floor. And, Mr. Chair, I think this amendment, what I'm told, simply provides funding to an agency that's been getting it every year to assist in the process of tax refunds. And then I heard the author of the legislation talking about all the issues that DRT has currently, the working conditions. Mr. Chair, I know that you used to work at Rev and Tax as well. And there were leaks and issues in that building. How long ago was that? You can imagine what it's like now, working there now. So any amount that they have, that they receive, it's to help DRT for those employees who are working there, but most especially to provide a timely process of these tax returns. taking away something that they use every year, especially now since, Mr. Chair, now they're going to be able to process CTC and ATC. Not only that, Mr. Chair, but EITC as well. That's going to be processed on reimbursements. So I do have a question for OFB. Steve, is there any kind of administrating cost or fees that's been ever given to revenue tax for EITC?
I am not aware of any administrative costs being charged to the EITC.
Okay, thank you, Steve. So that being said, Mr. Chair, you know, this is the only opportunity for revenue tax to receive some type of help, assistance when processing. And, you know, I also heard from the previous speaker talking about what we don't know what's going to happen in the next couple hours or next day or two. And, you know, Mr. Chair, you have a lot of restaurants right now who are not even opening their doors because of the new mandate. They're closed. A lot of them are. So a lot of people are going to be relying on their tax refunds, if anything. A lot of people are going to be relying on the CTC and the ATC. They're going to need that assistance right away, Mr. Chair. And for us to take away something that actually helps provide that, you're taking away funding that belongs to them, that's justly needed, but most especially during this time, this pandemic. Mr. Chair, since the pandemic started in March of 2020, I've been keeping a calendar of the numbers of those who are being tested positive. In the last week, we are now seeing numbers that are 101, 88, up to 122. These numbers are building in the last week, Mr. Chair. This is definitely alarming for all of us. I'm finding it right here. Okay, yep. This is just in this last week, Mr. Chair. 101 yesterday, 147 on Wednesday, 126 on Tuesday, 188 on Monday. Mr. Chair, that's quite a bit of numbers going on for us not to make sure that funding that's provided for individuals, especially CTC, ATC, that was given us ahead of time, is given to these individuals. And the revenue tax is going to need that money to process those checks. They're going to need it. So I ask my colleagues to please support this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tello. Does any of my colleagues would like to speak? Last round. Senator Perez, you want to close? Oh, Senator Duenas.
Jesus Masi, Mr. Chairman. Steve, if I'm correct, this situation, when revenue tax showed up, they were discussing essentially an increase to a project and to processing that they have been doing for a number of years now. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator.
So the same people who are processing ACT and additional funds are the same people that, or the same workforce that's been processing for as long as this program's been in place, correct? I mean, we would assume.
I would assume, Senator, the staff of revenue taxation are the people that do actually do the tax refunds. I'm also assuming that throughout the years, we have allowed them to recruit new individuals, new employees to help out in these critical areas. They've claimed that, for years have been neglected. So if I follow your line of reasoning is that I would assume, yes, there is the same people that are processing tax refunds, plus any other new hires they may have put on board since.
I seem to remember too, and I just want to see, Steve, if your recollection and OFB's recollection was the same as mine. When we had the panel down here, and there was a discussion on the increase in the amounts available for ACT, additional revenues, I remember a couple of questions to the panel. One was, do you have a plan at this point for the revenues? My recollection was there was no detailed plan. I remember there were a number of amendments already before the realization that every penny in that account had to, the announcement came out subsequently that all of it had to be used for tax refunds, which freed up our general fund appropriation, which was the amendment. Then essentially the revenue not being available anymore, there was no plan, and there was amendments to use those resources for other purposes to begin with. Would that be correct, Steve, in terms of the way that the original excess was planned for, the 10%?
Senator, the way we approached the FY22 budget, especially when it came to the EITC, the CT, and the ACTC, was under the assumption that we were going to get reimbursed for the monies, for the general fund monies we put up front. Within the last day or two, we've received information that now that the CTC and the ACTC, although we knew that we were going to get it in advance, okay, has been given to us in an advance form. And that because it's been given to us in an advanced form, we were also told that we couldn't set aside portion of what we originally considered was allowable for 10% administrative costs. So now that we are told that we cannot utilize or go down that avenue and set aside the 10%, we must restore the entire amount back and use it for tax refunds. So therefore, freeing up the 10% that we actually was keeping in reserve, that we, if the body chooses, we are going to have to appropriate in order to balance the budget.
Okay. My last question, we gave revenue tax what their request was. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. I just need this information to be able to decide on the way forward, because I know that some of the other interests with regard to the obligations are things that are due and payable to our people. So I'm going to have to weigh this decision based upon that, and also based upon reflections on this floor that consistently have put us in a situation. First of all, when we have members of the administration that come down and make representations to us before their budget hearing and in this committee of the whole, in terms of what their needs are, in terms of what the requirements are, those representations we have to take to heart. And then the fact that because we don't have a plan for the ARP funds, it's almost as though anything can be funded in terms of if it has a shortfall. So we're sitting here fighting over resources, competing interest on minimal appropriations because we've taken a conservative point of view. And any one of us can throw our hands up in the air and say, if it's the governor's priority, it can be funded. if past due is the governor's priority in terms of obligations to customs, obligations to officers, obligations that were made in terms of pay increases, then the governor can do it. If the representation is going to be made as well, that because of COVID and because of the fact that we have additional ACT and because we have additional resources, manpower can be brought in through ARP to be able to manage these issues, then it can happen. That's why we're in the dark here. Are we even going to make any bad decisions when it comes to what we think are priorities? I don't know. Because the fact of the matter is it comes down to what is the governor's priority. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. One more look. Does any of my colleagues would like to speak on this amendment? There being none, would you like to close, Senator Paris?
Yes.
Point of information, Mr. Chair, before we close, I think the speaker had requested that because she's been asked to see the governor, I guess there's an emergency that's coming in, and asked that if there's any voting, that she be present for that, to hold off on any voting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Was that, try that one more time?
It's in the, if you look, Mr. Chair, on the WhatsApp chat for the Senador, there was a request by the speaker because of the call to add a loop from the governor for herself, the Chief Justice, and the Mayor's Council President.
And that she was called? I understand that I saw her walking out, but what was what's the request then?
The request inside the WhatsApp was asked that is appreciated to hold on to votes until I return. Going now, expected 30 minutes. And it's, I believe, to the governor's office for an emergency call, Mr. Chair.
All right, then we'll take a recess for 30 minutes. And I mean, I'm trying to understand where the budget process, but wait for 30 minutes. I hope there's good information to provide to this body. If there isn't, folks, let's not discuss no more and we just move on, okay? 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee of the Whole, let's call back to order. I believe there was no one else to speak. Senator Perez, would you close on your amendment? Or do you have a motion to make?
Yeah, no, I'd like to close on the amendment. So, yeah, again, this amendment aims to restore a portion of what's due to DRT in regards to administration of ACTC. That does not include the additional tasks such as the CTC and the EITC. I think it's only fair. And just to give them that, considering that the budget was not, when DRT submitted their budget, it was with the understanding that they were going to get this 10% in administrative cost. I think this will be the first time in history where the legislature, should this amendment not pass, where the legislature does not provide this 10%. And again, we're putting more pressure on already, stressed agency to accomplish more with less. I would like to add that despite all of this, the staff has made such strides in reforming their processes. As you heard from the director, Shimizu, they've managed to automate a large portion or some of their functions, which can only aid in improving processing of all their processing of income tax returns. But they're just starting, and I think they're on this trajectory of change. I think it's really important to support our staff. I mean, people tend to, as some of the employees feel, is that they're forgotten and unfunded, inadequately funded, that is. They really need our support. And I think, the word that comes to mind is Anafa Malik, right? Anafa Malik, it's through DRT that they're able to collect almost $600 million in taxes, which we are now appropriating, which is this body is appropriating. And it only really behooves us to support their needs. They do this quietly, without complaints, and it's important that we recognize their work.
Are you done?
So yes, basically I urge my colleagues to stop ignoring and taking DRT for granted and to restore the administrative costs. Their budget must be kept intact to support their needs as they take on more mandates. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Perez. I ask my colleagues, are there any objection to this? There's an objection. All in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. Amendment fails. We will now proceed to the next amendment. The next amendment is
Mr. Chair, I have another amendment to proffer.
Senator Perez. It's not in the sequence. We will go to the next person.
It's actually it's in line, the line number. It's the same line number.
No, Senator Perez. We're going in the sequence. If you had, that's why I asked you if you had a motion. Now, we will go to the next person, and the next person, unfortunately for you, is Senator Nelson. Senator Nelson's amendment, because I discussed that with the sequence earlier.
Could I just ask the sequence, Mr. Chair? This sounds like a new rule.
What new rule, Speaker, are you referring to?
That's what I'm asking. What is it?
The rule is when you submit your amendments, we follow the sequence in order by page. First come, first serve. If you happen to be both on the same page, the same line, then we move along. Now, if as we're moving along an amendment, you all of a sudden think of a different amendment within the same page, that doesn't work that way. You have to wait until we finish the sequence as we have stated earlier, and that was earlier that the sequence was in the flow. That's why on many of your amendments, Speaker, I called upon you and each and every one of you. We went down the line. So we will proceed now.
We did
okay,
go
Speaker?
down the line by the lines on the page, Mr. Chair.
Yes, and the next one is L10, page 60. Because we're done, Senator Perez's amendment.
Point of information, there is an amendment, line 1 to 27.
Mr. Chair, I believe you were going by the time of submission.
Was not at all what we have
And
been
I
doing all
asked-
day, Mr.
and
Chair.
I-
So I
Hold
just
on.
ask
Let's
that we
take a
be-
quick
be
recess.
consistent.
Speaker, we're going
Are we on the air now?
Committee of the Whole is back in order. My colleagues, we will proceed now to Senator Nelson's amendment. If you want to overrule my decision, then make the motion and we can put it to vote. Is there a motion?
I'm just going to raise a point of order, Mr. Chair, that we are proceeding to a different subsection of the bill, subsection 2, while we have an amendment on subsection 1 pending. And that's what we've been doing all this time, is going in order.
Madam Speaker, we are moving to the same page in the same general area. All right? Other than that, we'll move along. Senator
Mr.
Tello?
Chair, just, looking at the amendment, Senator Nelson's amendment is on Section 2. But I believe the amendment that Senator Paris is trying to do is in Section 1. So are we going to go by sections? So we're still on number 1? We're still on number 1, correct?
Senator
Or are we
Tello,
moving to Section 2?
I just wanted to make it very clear. If I'm going to keep waiting, and if my colleagues are going to keep waiting for somebody to think of a new amendment as
Mr.
we're moving
Chair,
along, that's all.
That's got
Excuse-
nothing to do with the
excuse
point
me,
of order
Senator-
that we're raising, Mr. Chair.
Madam Speaker, Senator Tello is recognized, not you. Please be patient. I'll recognize you immediately after Senator Tello. All I'm concerned about is that we're just moving along with the amendments. That's all I'm trying to do. I'm trying to accommodate everyone in here. So if we can just move along, we'd be okay. Now, I understand what you're saying, that it's also in Section 1. Understood. And that's all I'm saying. I'm going to move along, and I'm going to address the next section.
So Section 1 is closed now?
I haven't closed page 60
Oh,
yet,
Okay, thank you.
but we'll see what Section 2, what the next amendment does. It may just fix everything, and then maybe the next amendment may fix everything again.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
That's all I'm trying to do, is get this to move along.
Okay, thank you.
All right? Madam Speaker, did you want to speak?
I already raised my point of order. I would stand by that point of order, that is exactly the way we have been proceeding all this time, and I don't like to see the rules change in the middle of the game here, Mr. Chair. That we've been going section by section, that's the order that otherwise if we go by page number, we're going to end up doing sections out of order.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We will just continue to move along unless you want to make a motion to overrule my decision.
Sure, I'll make that motion, Mr.
Okay,
Chair,
make
to
the motion.
overrule and that we would go back to the original rules instead of changing it right now.
All right? There's a motion to overrule. How many are in favor of the overrule? Please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. We will now proceed on to Senator Nelson, your amendment on SB 55 TCN L10, page 60.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, the amendment is labeled SB 55 TCN L10, page 60 in the Google Drive. I just would like to there's a little error here where it says the sum of $2 million is allocated. This is to read, the sum of $2 million is appropriated from the fiscal year 2022 general fund. Such funds shall be expended to the Department of Revenue and Taxation. Such funds shall be expended for personnel, overtime, equipment, supplies, training, janitorial services, automation services, and training for the Department of Revenue and Taxation taxpayer services. Mr. Chair, I know we didn't make the provision at the top, but I'd like OFB to ensure that this $2 million is in their general fund appropriation added to it. This was the $6.1 million that we use to offset these costs. And so the intent of the money is to go $2 million to DRT, $3 million for the hazardous pay. That's in accordance with law since 2017. And then $1 million for the $500,000 was for UOG and I think it was Elder Justice. That's all.
Thank you, Senator Nelson, and that's also to make the adjustment of is allocated to is appropriated, correct?
That is correct. They should get an additional $2 million into the general fund appropriation on their category in their chapter.
All right, thank
And
you.
that allocated was an error.
Does anyone would like to speak to this amendment? Are there any objection to this?
Point of order, Mr. Chair, can just clarify the amendment. They're changing allocated to another word, and she's also talking about putting this information up on subsection 1, and I think that should be clarified.
Senator Nelson?
We just want to make sure that DRT gets their $2 million on top of what is originally appropriated in their bill. And we want to ensure that it's used for these categories.
Are we adding it also, are we going to put an additional 2 in subsection 1 of the bill as well? Is that what this amendment's going to do? Section 1 is not in the floor amendment, that's why we're asking, Mr. Chair, but
Yes.
May I yield, Mr.
if I have
Chair?
no problem adding it to section 1 and section 2, so they get 4 million.
All right.
Mr. Chair, the intent is to raise DRT an additional $2 million in their general fund. And
Understood.
this is what the $2 million will go to,
Understood. I'll check legal.
not an additional 4.
Understood. Let me check legal. It would take a short recess. Senator Nelson, and for the speaker's response, we met with legal. You have a motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to ask for a recess.
All right, thank you. We'll continue recess. Committee of the Whole is called back to order. Senator Nelson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'd like to withdraw my amendment, and I'd like to yield to Senator Sabina.
Thank you very much. Senator Sabina, your amendment, ma'am. You have the floor. Or correction, there's a motion to withdraw. Are there any objections to the withdrawal of the amendment by Senator Nelson? There being none, so ordered. Senator Perez, your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So after the previous amendment failed, I wanted to proffer another amendment to at least provide some funds, only, I guess it's a portion still of the 10% that we normally set aside in previous budgets. Right now, it's at $2 million, so it's a $2 million appropriation from the general fund.
All right, thank you. Does anyone would like to speak to that amendment? Senator Nelson.
Can we just have the amendment file so we can see what the amendment is?
Oh,
please?
okay, the amendment number is SB 555 SFP L1-27 P60 L1-2, page 61, number 2, COTW.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, this amendment, if you read, it says appropriation, the sum of $11,568,263. And that is in addition to the general fund revenue of $9,468,459. Is just the question to the author of the amendment.
Yes, Senator Perez, do you yield to the question?
Sorry, can she repeat that?
You can repeat your questions, please.
So we're adding $2 million to the general fund, is that correct? In section 1H?
Appropriations, 2 million appropriation from the general fund.
From the general fund. Okay, I just want to, so the 2 million from the general fund would be 11,468,459, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So would it be okay to make the necessary correction here where it says 11,568,000 in the first paragraph?
Yeah, yes, that's correct. So yeah, technical corrections would be needed.
Okay. I'm reading this SB 55 SFP line 1 P60-L27 P61. Is that the correct file name? Can you just reiterate the file name? So, because I'm thinking that maybe that's the one, the incorrect one.
It's,
okay.
yeah, L1-27 P60, L1-2 P61-2.
P60 on the bottom.
It's on the very bottom of the list.
Wait, hold on.
All right? Are we good?
Okay, Mr. Chair, I stand in support of this amendment. I believe that this money could be used. I hope and I encourage the DRT to pull from the community the necessary resources that they need to give their people an opportunity to be able to grow, and especially during this time with the pandemic, how they've always continued to implement these new programs so that the whole island can benefit from them, and I thank them for their hard work. And I thank the sponsor of this amendment.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Does anyone else would like to speak to the amendment? Senator Perez?
Yeah, just the numbers, I think I need to be recalculated, so I'm not sure if that's the correct number.
If you like, Senator Perez, the OFB will make the technical corrections to make sure that the math is correct.
Okay,
That
thank
the
you.
2 million is the intent of this amendment. Right, Mr. Guerrero? Mr. Guerrero is on it right now.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else would like to speak to this amendment? Speaker, Madam Speaker?
Yeah, I support this amendment. Again, $2 million more towards Department of Revenue and Tax just brings them to what they've been receiving in the prior fiscal year. And hopefully will continue to allow them to increase the capacity to accept 1040 forms online, because they're limited right now. But if they can increase that, they can process refunds faster and for the benefit of the taxpayers. I hope, that despite their processing faster, that we will also be able to come up with the funds so that they can pay those faster as well, and to pay for those that are continue to be outstanding. So I support this amendment. I support every dollar that we can continue to give rev and tax so that they can make all their services online as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Blas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I also support this amendment. I want to thank my two colleagues for coming to the understanding and we moving forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Does anyone else like to speak? I'm looking for a hand. No hand? Senator Nelson, I already you spoke, but yes, ma'am?
A point of inquiry, just
Okay.
what was their appropriation for FY21? DRT's overall appropriation?
For EITC.
No, DRT's overall appropriation
Oh, RNT.
for FY21?
I got the general fund, special fund, 11.7, right? It's 11.7. Total amount, Senator, is 11,700,000.
So just to note that they're given more this year, not less or the same as last year, is that correct?
No, this year's appropriation with the addition would be more than FY21 appropriation, or FY20 appropriation.
Okay, so are they given more this year?
Pardon?
Are they given more this year? Is DRT given more? Because there was a comment saying that we were giving them less.
Yeah, well, the addition that we're doing now in the amendment would give them an additional 2 million.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else like to speak? If not, do you need to close, Senator Pierce? Or you want me to go ahead and, I didn't hear an objection, but you want to close?
Yeah, just a message from Director Shimizu. She wants to thank the body for their support so they can process refunds more quickly and truly work to provide the level of services that our people deserve, and they request that we support them any way possible.
Thank you. Are there an objection to this amendment? I see none. Motion passes. Now we will proceed to the next one. Senator Amanda Shelton, I know it's my amendment, but if you could read the amendment, please, appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. On behalf of Senator San Augustine, this is SB 55 JSSA L3 P61 to line 3, page 61, to add a new section 4 to section H of section 1, chapter V of the bill to read, continuing appropriation authorization, notwithstanding any other provision of law, the unexpended balance of funds appropriated to the Department of Revenue and Taxation in Public Law 35-99 shall not lapse and shall continue to have available until fully expended. And colleagues, this is an amendment to allow for the department to use the resources that we have previously appropriated to them, to allow them to expend those funds that they have not been able to use throughout this year, and we ask for your support.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. Senator Duenas?
Mr. Chairman, and once again, I rise in support. I think this is in line now, and with some of the compromises that have been made on the floor as well. I do agree with the retiring senator earlier that this is a significant increase now with the $2 million to revenue tax. But then once again here, the ability to carry over, use every tool in the toolbox to get the job done. And so I think that, we're doing everything that we can You know, we know that there have been representations made years ago that, you know, this was the signature program, you know, to get rev and tax what they need. Well, we're going to do what we can do down here, Mr. Chairman, and then we'll see where the other priorities lie. But I think that, you know, with how we're moving forward now with this general fund appropriation and continuing appropriations as well, you know, that should suffice for now. And we know where there's additional resources, so we'll, to be determined. Jesus Masi, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Dueñas. Does anyone else like to speak to this amendment? There being none, are there any objection to this amendment? I see no hands. Motion passes. We'll now move to Senator, I think it's Senator Sabina Paris. You have page 67. It would be SB 55 SFP L19, page 67. Ma'am, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a simple amendment just for continuing appropriation authorization for Guam Police Department, notwithstanding any of the provision of law. Any and all appropriate funds from the general fund, the Guam Highway Fund, the Police Patrol Vehicle and Equipment Revolving Fund, the Police Services Fund to the Guam Police Department for fiscal year 2021 shall not lapse and shall continue to be available until fully expended.
Thank you, Senator Paris. Does anyone like to speak to this amendment? Senator Dueñas, you would like, Senator Nelson, you would like to speak to this amendment? Don't hurt her, right? This is a continuing appropriation for GPD. That's what it is.
Just to get some clarification, Steve, it says, and all appropriated funds from the general fund, the Guam Highway Fund, the Police Patrol Vehicle and Equipment Revolving Fund. Is this specific to the chapter of GPD, or is this specific that it will that GPD has the authority to capture all appropriations?
It's for all appropriations that they got, may it be
Within GPD?
for GPD only. So anything and everything that they would have been appropriated, such as the Guam Highway Fund, the Police Patrol Vehicle and Equipment, Police Services Fund, pretty
May
much.
I ask the question to the sponsor?
Yes,
if that
please.
is the intent of the amendment? Is it
Yes.
with only in GPD?
It's only for GPD.
I'm asking the
Okay.
sponsor if that is,
Senator Paris, if you would yield to that question, please.
Yes, thank you. So I do yield to the question. There was a discussion earlier about perhaps not funding, not providing enough funds for overtime. And I just want to make sure that our police officers are getting the funding that they need. Also, in addition to what other expenditures that they need to complete at the end of the fiscal year, as well as to, if there's any carryover, that they can continue to use that.
Senator Nelson, did that answer the question?
just a follow-up, and that is specific to the GPD chapter that the funds that they received in fiscal year 2021?
Try that one
No,
more
to
time.
the sponsor.
Oh, for the sponsor?
Yeah,
Senator-
the concept is very similar to the other continuing appropriations for all other chapters. The idea is that whatever funds that were appropriated to them, whether it's general fund or special funds, that they still can avail themselves of those funds. As you know, sometimes it's very difficult to get these, purchases or expenditures processed quickly, and we don't want to have a lapse in services. So this would allow them that flexibility.
Specific to Chapter 5 in the GPD section.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Does the Senator Dueñas?
Mr. Chairman, I mean, because words do matter sometimes, I think maybe that, to clear up what Senator Nelson is discussing, maybe just after general fund, we insert the word specific to, then the comma, the highway fund, police patrol vehicle, equipment revolving fund, police services fund, Guam Police Department for fiscal year 2021, and continuing. I mean, it might not matter, but we don't want to have conflicts in law, right? Because it ends at general fund.
Yeah, so I mean, I will make that amendment at this time. General fund specific to, comma, and continuing forward.
All right. Does anyone else want to speak to this amendment? Are there any, would you like, Senator, Madam Speaker?
Could you repeat the amendment to the amendment since it's not in writing?
Sure. So, Madam Speaker, what I'm trying to do here, and especially since
Just
it
the
was
words, yeah.
the word specific to. So this would read now from notwithstanding any other provision of law, comma, any and all appropriated funds from the general fund specific to, comma, the Guam Highway Fund, the Police Patrol Vehicle and Equipment Revolving Fund, Police Services Fund, the Guam Police Department for fiscal year 2021 shall not lapse and shall continue to be available until fully expended.
So it's to add the word specific to.
After
Yeah.
general fund.
I guess I understand the intent. I would just object because we're saying funds, it already says funds from the general fund and any of these special funds to the Guam Police Department. So it's appropriated funds from the general fund to the Guam Police Department. That's the appropriations. I think that's clear, and we're going to make it less clear by adding any more language.
All right. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before you speak, Senator Paris and Senator Reyes, before you continue, quick recess. Let me get with legal so we make sure the
Sure.
I's are dotted and
Sorry,
the
a
T's
point-
are crossed.
point
Senator
of
Paris, I'll
information?
just get the legal to,
Yeah, point of information, maybe it may
Yes,
save
ma'am.
some efforts. Yeah, it's not needed because it's clear that it says, we're adding a subsection, M, of Section 1, Chapter 5 of the bill. So that would basically limit it to this section.
understood, but I'm still going to call recess, make sure legal is good to go. Thank you. Recess for a few minutes. committee of the whole is called back to order. Senator Dueñas, you have the floor.
Sus Masi, Mr. Chairman, and as per legal counsel, as long as we continue to be consistent throughout the budget on the language for continuing appropriation, we shouldn't have any issues, so I withdraw my amendment to insert specific to. Sus Masi.
All right, there's a motion to withdraw his amendment. Any objection to that? There being none, his amendment is withdrawn. Does anyone else would like to speak to this amendment? I believe there's none. Senator Perez, do you need to close on this? Otherwise, we vote. Are there any objection to this amendment? There being none, amendment passes. We will now go to the next amendment, and we have Senator Amanda Shelton. If I'm correct, well, you have quite a few. Quite a few. Senator Shelton, you have, my colleagues, it's under SB 55 ALS L1 to 12, page 73. We're at page 73. That's with the Department of Youth Affairs. Senator Shelton, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have two companion amendments for the Department of Youth Affairs. As you recall, colleagues, we increased the revenue of the Healthy Futures Fund in the first chapter of the budget, and there's still a remaining balance of the Healthy Futures Fund that has not been appropriated in any part of this budget. The Department of Youth Affairs is one of the agencies that receives a chunk of this Healthy Futures Fund, and so this is an amendment first to page 73, lines 1 through 12, to increase the Healthy Futures Fund appropriation from $726,221 to $930,221, and that is the remaining balance of the Healthy Futures Fund. So that's an increase of $204,000, which then increases the total of the Department of Youth Affairs budget. You can see that on the last line. And the purpose of this amendment to add the remaining money of the Healthy Futures Fund balance to the Department of Youth Affairs is to allow DYA to pay the 25% differential pay for officers within the department. And as some of you may recall, there was a lot of discussion about this differential pay for corrections officers at both the Department of Corrections and the Department of Youth Affairs. This is a policy that was approved by the Department of Administration and unfortunately was not fully funded within the Department of Youth Affairs' budget. The Department of Youth Affairs and DOA estimate that this differential pay for their corrections officers within the department will come out to about $405,000. This is obviously not the full amount, the $204,000 remaining in the Healthy Futures Fund, but I'm also hoping to add a continuing appropriations authorization for the Department of Youth Affairs to be able to fully pay this differential pay, carry over some of their funds from the prior fiscal year, and get this additional money from the Healthy Futures Fund to ensure that we're paying our corrections officers who are working within the department. We know that these uniformed officers are faced with a lot of stress in confined areas. They serve in a unique position, especially corrections officers within the Department of Youth Affairs, who are faced with even greater challenges helping to rehabilitate our youth offenders and keeping them out of the adult system. So they are faced with very unique challenges and need this additional support This will also help with retention of officers within the Department of Youth Affairs. So I ask my colleagues for your support of all of these amendments today.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. Anyone on the amendment? Anyone on the amendment? Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you. The sponsor of the amendment said that this differential pay has been approved by DOA, but that it was not fully funded. I would like to ask OFB, because they did represent to us that all personnel have been taken care of in this budget under existing pay. Did we underfund DYA? Not enough to cover their personnel?
No, Senator. All the bodies, all warm bodies reflected in the FY22 staffing pattern that was submitted was fully funded.
All right, thanks. And can you tell me whether you know whether they are receiving the approved differential pay already? If it's approved?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to make sure that it's either currently implemented or going to be implemented. But I would get back to you, Senator.
At the DYA budget hearing, was there any notice given by the department that they were not implementing this yet?
Senator, during their budget hearing, they did mention it during the hearing, but the differential pay is not reflected in their FY22 staffing pattern.
They did or they did not mention
They
it?
did not. It is not showing.
So are you saying we underfunded them?
I
Or they have enough to cover the
I
differential
won't use the
pay?
word underfunded, Senator. I can only fund what is being requested. If they did not request it, then I'm just assuming that those funds that we are appropriating for them will be sufficient.
All right. And are the funds sufficient to cover this differential pay now that we're talking about it?
If you're talking about differential pay, first of all, I need to find out whether or not it's being implemented. Because if it's, I can assume it's probably not being implemented because it's not reflected in their FY22 budget. So what was reflected in the staffing pattern for FY22 is what we funded. So let me check to see whether or not it's actually currently being implemented and whether or not they plan to implement it in FY22, because at this point, I can safely say that if it's not in their FY22 staffing pattern, we did not fund it.
Right. But the other agencies, you told us they had lapses, they're able to cover, or what do you call it, vacancies, that were able to cover all of the whatever pay obligations that they would have. So we don't know whether this is actually being implemented. You don't know whether it's even been approved, you're saying, for which year, but do they have vacancies or that other type of funding, like you pointed out, in other agencies that could cover that?
That's correct at this point. We can verify whether or not, if they are implementing it, I'd like to find out how they're covering it for FY21, and if they plan to pay it in FY22, why was it not requested?
I do have a point of
I think
information,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. In the 35th Guam Legislature, I introduced a bill to reclassify certain employees of the Department of Youth Affairs to officially make them corrections officers. After we had the public hearing for that bill, there was discussion between the Department of Youth Affairs and the Department of Administration, and it was, we all came to the conclusion that the Department of Administration would implement this policy and allow for this change within their staffing pattern. And so this differential pay has not yet been implemented, but we know that there is a plan from the Department of Administration to allow the Department of Youth Affairs to pay the differential pay to former youth, I don't want to misspeak on their title, but the youth corrections officer or juvenile corrections officers.
Yes, I'm just looking for the information from OFB, whether, like we got for every other agency, whether they have vacancies that are able to fund this type of thing or not. But of course, if it's an approved policy, it should be covered whether we put this in here or not, and they're entitled to it. So you're not telling us whether they have enough to cover it or not. So it's very hard to make a decision on this, but I don't have any objection to them getting something that they're entitled to. I just want to know what the numbers are. That's what we're trying to do here. The reason also that I bring it up is because, the more we take from HF, the Healthy Futures Fund, and give to different agencies, we're taking away from, we're in violation of the statute that requires Healthy Futures funds go by percentage to certain agencies, including, as I pointed out earlier, 12% to Guam Memorial Hospital. And the Guam Memorial Hospital got none. And the Cancer Trust Fund is supposed to get 15%, and they got $1 million. So that's 12% is $5 million. So they're entitled to more than that. So I'm just pointing that out, that we're getting further and further. So if we don't have to get further and they are able to accommodate it, that's the kind of information I'm trying to get from OFB. But otherwise, of course, if these employees are entitled to this, and it's not clear, I guess, whether this has actually been implemented or not, but if they're entitled to it, they should get it. And I think whether we put this in or not, they're entitled. If it's approved, they're entitled to it, and they should be getting it. I don't know if OFB is going to give us the answers or not, but otherwise, that's my comments on this section.
Okay, thank you, Madam Speaker. OFB is working on getting that information. Anyone else on the amendment? If no one else wants to speak on the amendment, we'll take a short recess so that OFB can get that answer to the question.